whole of business contracting, the new frontier for sustainable revenue growth. Mr. Kelton.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm hopeless behind the podium, I'm afraid, folks. Thank you very much for inviting us here for the two opening speakers. There was a very topical and stimulating debate, which I will try to make some reference back towards. And I think there's some very interesting messages for the carriers and service providers in this room and on a global basis of what is happening in our industry. I was listening to Manuel earlier on, and he was making an analogy of this massive machine, Google, who has created a model of revenues through advertising. And I was thinking, there's nothing new. I mean, this whole concept of volume-based, give it for nothing, there is no such thing as something for nothing. We realize that, right? In any industry we're in, there's nothing for nothing. But the Google model is not new. Those who are old enough around the crowd will remember Yellow Pages. Who remembers Yellow Pages? Right? Is a methodology where traditionally the telephone companies would provide advertising. And what they did is they gave you the Yellow Pages book for free. Okay, so you got the book for nothing, you had to pay for the advert. So why did that model work so well? Because the traditional telephone company had the incumbency of having the number. It had the billing relationship now with that client, it had a telephone number. So it's no different to the Google model, we just moved on. Now what Google has is your email address. It now has you on the database. It now has you as a client or a recipient. It has a vehicle to get access to you and suck some more opportunistic revenues from you. So it's not a new model, it's just moved forward to the next generation space. And we as carriers need to recognize the fact that nothing stands still. The other really, I think, very valuable commentary, I think it was from Manuel and of course Stefan referred to as well, is this traditional model that's really starting to affect us, such as the Skype model. Well, I'm a Skyper, I use it all the time. And I sit and scratch my head. One, how does it ever make money? Because it hasn't. And secondly, why has it been sold for half of the price that somebody paid for 2 years ago to a private equity company? Guess what? It's not sustainable. And the third part about the model, which I thought was interesting, Manuel raised, is none of the organizations who have been involved in this massive internet evolution to create value, usually for a few owners or shareholders, have ever invested $1 back in the core infrastructure. Never. They have not done it. They simply create a great value-added proposition model and look for a get-out-of-jail clause. And we as the global carrier infrastructure fraternity are sitting here trying to wonder, how do we harness this? Do we get scared from it? Are we competing with it? Or do we eventually buy it to make it go away? And that's what typically happens, isn't it? We go and buy these companies. We've got all the intellectual property in this room. We don't need to buy some guru who creates an advertising company. However, I feel kind of enthusiastically passionate about this. And one of the topics I was going to discuss was talking about whole of business contracting. It's kind of a bit of a long, waffly name, really. And I won't spend a lot of time standing between yourselves and morning tea. The reason I thought it was topical is because I see no difference to operating in an environment between the wholesale and retail business model. And I think Stefan alluded to that in his concluding talk. It is about the customer's customer. And we don't wake up every morning and say, hey, let's put a new 10 gig wave on a cable system because it's a good idea. We do it because ultimately somewhere in the world is a client who wishes to utilize that service. So I thought it would be quite useful just kind of teasing out some ideas around this, because if we think about it from a retail perspective, let's think I'm sitting there in Australia or in the UK or the US, wherever my business operates, I'm saying I would like to do a whole business deal. I would like to subscribe to everything that Telstra has to offer, whether it's voice or data or mobility or content or international, etc. It should be no different to the way we engage as carriers. However, what we're actually doing usually is integrating usually diverse supply chains. So the model of whole business is not about trying to compete with each other and eat each other's lunch. It's trying to find a way to get some synergies around leveraging core assets between infrastructure providers. You can tell that our marketing man is very, very artistic. He gave me these slides about 10 minutes ago and he said, you can talk about anything. So I was going to talk about huskies. But I mean, change is constant. Very topical discussion this morning, I think, by both providers there. Look what happens if you do not keep up. What happens is if you do not keep up, suddenly, if the new innovative player comes along. But also when I think about it, change is constant. But sometimes we see this being replayed again. Let's think about IP interconnect. The IP forms and everything, which are absolutely necessary. Can anyone remember back to, CCIP, what is it? G711, 712 for PCM. We spent years as carriers defining standards so that we could make phone calls on the TDM platform between each other. And then we did it at 64K and somebody said, that's a lot of bandwidth. Let's compress. So we created G712 for ADPCM or whatever we created. And we spent time and time and time creating standards. And then the innovators, usually in that stage in the 80s, the equipment manufacturers, were providing technology differentiation faster than the services we could provide. And suddenly, I remember it launched. Telstra launched 32K ADPCM in 1992. I've been selling 8 kilobits ADPCM since 1986. So guys, if we as carriers wait for the forums, not because they're not powerful and important and a necessity, we must operate with a level of speed and enthusiasm to get outcomes, not about technology. That said, I'm a great believer in having these forums, and I think as an industry we've matured. I think the IP enablement of our business will have dramatically changed the way we work. I think the iForum, which we'll hear about later on, will move with a pace which we've not seen before. Here's a topical logo, probably known to a few of us. I have a confession to make. I had never used an iPod until I got an iPhone. How sad is that? I had no idea how to download iTunes until I went to try and buy my favorite track on CD, which was now no longer available. We don't buy CDs anymore. So I had to very quickly learn how to plug my iPhone into my PC and download some sad jazz track from the 60s that I wanted to hear. And it's very interesting. So this, in 4 years, has dramatically changed an industry. It has dramatically changed an industry. And anyone who's teenage children will know, I mean, I remember when I thought 45s and LPs were cool. I mean, the CDs are now defunct. So there is an entire generation Y and new millennia who will never, ever, ever purchase anything that's physical anymore. I think it's kind of sad, unfortunately, but I'm a bit of an old fart on these things. But again, if you make the analogy in our industry, this is moving very, very dynamically quickly. And this is an opportunity, not a threat. The whole business contract, and when I started on this kind of journey of putting the ideas together in this, I suddenly started to worry about a lot of companies who are in the carrier-to-carrier business get concerned about this because we think we're stealing from Peter to pay Paul, we think we're eating our own lunch. And the reality is, when I go and talk to end customers, most end customers, in fact every end customer you've ever met in the world, knows that no single carrier owns infrastructure, services, or a proposition in every geographical territory they actually operate in. So generally what happens is customers want to know that they're dealing with an integrator or a prime contractor or their key carrier partner who can deliver that service on their behalf and use his or her leverage with their partners to get the best deal. It's the classic model of integrator come operator. And we've seen a couple of quite successful examples of that. However, where the model becomes flawed is the further away you get from your core asset base if you own assets, usually the more margin dilution you have in the proposition you provide. So for example, I do provide services to customers in Africa and South America, but guess what? Telstra does not own any core assets in these locations. So I have to procure from a partner. But I do that eyes wide open, so the partner I buy it from knows it's Telstra procuring on behalf of the customer. But more importantly, I usually tell the customer that as well. I tell the customer, here's my partner